For the BOT, fair to say it's either a cut or a hold. Hike is not an option? Is that kind of like what we're looking at?
Linda, in this world of great uncertainty where anything can happen, I wouldn't say that anything is completely off the table.
So even a hike is not off the table?
Suppose there's a scenario where all of a sudden we get another, Russia-Ukraine type situation and commodity prices spike and it causes inflation to become entrenched and inflation expectations to become unanchored, then obviously I think, any kind of reasonable central bank would have to take some measures to address that. So, I'm reluctant to kind of commit, because, we will be guided by what happens. But the baseline view, as I pointed out, is, if we see, again, growth in inflation, and the other thing we keep a very close eye on is financial stability. Can't be underplayed in our context because we have such high household debt to GDP. Our baseline scenario is that things gradually coming back to our, the ranges that we'd like to see, and so, we feel that the current rate is appropriate for that.
Governor, you've been under a lot of pressure from the government to cut rates. In fact, the government has now suggested that perhaps you should revise up the inflation target, and some suggest perhaps that's a way to open up the option for you to cutting rates. I mean, what do you make of that suggestion from the government?
I can't speak to the motivation behind it because you'll have to ask the finance minister for that. But I can say that for us, from our standpoint, we feel that the current inflation target range of 1% to 3% is appropriate for the circumstances prevailing. And I think it's important to recognize it's worked pretty well for us. It's worked pretty well in terms of keeping inflation expectations anchored. If you look, for example, when we had the situation in Russia and Ukraine, headline inflation in Thailand spiked at close to 8%. It was like the highest in the region. But we also subsequently had very rapid disinflation, and it came back into our target within about 7 months, if I remember correctly, and then became even lower than that. But again, I think that shows the success of having this well-anchored inflation targeting regime, which kept inflation expectations anchored. So it's worked well. When we feel that a 1% to 3% range is sufficiently flexible to accommodate growth, particularly our potential growth, which is see it again ballpark about 3%. So we don't see that there's an immediate need to change that inflation target regime. That change, the inflation target is something that we agree and discuss with the Ministry of Finance. So it's something that is a joint decision, and we'll be doing that, having that discussion beginning in August and coming into September, October this year.
What are some potential ramifications, implications of raising that inflation target that may not have been considered by the government?
Well, one thing I think, Linda, is you raise the inflation target range. One, it increases the risk that inflation expectations become unanchored. If inflation expectations become unanchored, there's a danger that actual inflation starts to pick up. So we might see higher inflation. And the other thing also is once inflation expectations start to pick up, we will see bond yields pick up. So borrowing costs for the government, for the country as a whole, could also increase. So again, that's another reason why we feel that the 1% to 3% range, based upon all the available data right now, seems to be an appropriate range. But again, this is something that we have to discuss with the Ministry of Finance.